You're lucky, Michelle. Not everyone gets a second chance at love, Calvin's sister, Samantha, remarked with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. I forced a smile, my fingers tightening around the stem of my wine glass. The crystal clinked against my wedding ring, a sound that should have been celebratory, but felt more like a warning bell. My name is Michelle, and I'm living what should be a fairy tale. Instead, I'm trapped in a gilded cage, wondering how I missed the warning signs. You're right, Samantha, I replied, my voice steady despite the unease churning in my stomach. I am lucky. Calvin's hand found the small of my back, his touch possessive. Of course she is, he chimed in, his charming smile on full display for our dinner guests. And I'm the luckiest man alive. The room erupted in polite laughter and raised glasses. I joined in, but my eyes darted to Jasper, Calvin's son from his first marriage. The teenager's scowl spoke volumes. As the party continued around us, my mind drifted back to the whirlwind romance that led me here. Calvin had swept into my life like a hurricane, all charisma and grand promises. After my divorce, his attention felt like a balm to my wounded heart. Another drink, darling? Calvin's voice snapped me back to the present. I shook my head. I'm fine, thank you. His eyes narrowed slightly. Are you sure? You seem distracted. Just tired. I lied smoothly. It's been a long day of preparations. Calvin nodded, seemingly satisfied. As he turned away to chat with a business associate, I caught Samantha watching me with an odd expression. Everything all right, Michelle? She asked, her tone laced with false concern. I plastered on another smile. Of course. Why wouldn't it be? Samantha shrugged delicately. Oh, I don't know. You just seem off tonight. But I'm sure it's nothing. Before I could respond, Jasper appeared at my elbow. Dad wants you in the kitchen, he said flatly. Something about the hors d'oeuvres. I excused myself, grateful for the momentary escape. In the kitchen, I found Calvin frowning at a tray of canapés. Michelle, he said, his voice low and controlled. I thought we agreed on the smoked salmon, not these, whatever they are. I took a deep breath. The fishmonger was out of salmon. I had to improvise. Calvin's jaw tightened. You should have called me. I would have handled it. I didn't want to bother you at work, I explained, feeling my defenses rise. Besides, I'm perfectly capable of making decisions about appetizers. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've made a mess of things. The word stung, but I refused to let it show. The guests seemed to be enjoying them. Calvin stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The guests don't know any better. But I do. And I expect perfection in this house, Michelle. Do you understand? I nodded mutely, my throat tight. He smiled then, all traces of anger vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Good. Now let's get back to our guests. And Michelle? Try to look happy. It's a celebration, after all. As Calvin strode out of the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, my hands shaking. This was supposed to be my second chance at happiness. How had it turned into this? The sound of footsteps made me straighten up quickly. Jasper entered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. What did you do to piss him off this time? He asked bluntly. I sighed. Nothing, Jasper. It was just a misunderstanding about the food. He snorted. Right. Because Dad always gets that worked up over appetizers. Jasper, please. I began, but he cut me off. Save it, he snapped. I don't need your excuses. Just try not to ruin everything, okay? He was happy before you came along. As Jasper stormed out, leaving me alone in the suddenly stifling kitchen, I felt the walls of my perfect life closing in. The woman who had fallen for Calvin's charm and promises seemed like a stranger now. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and prepared to rejoin the party. But as I reached for the door, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my mother, Evelyn. How are you holding up, sweetheart? Remember, you're stronger than you know. Call me if you need anything. For the first time that evening, I felt a genuine smile tug at my lips. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reclaim the woman I used to be. With renewed determination, I stepped back into the lion's den of our perfectly curated life, wondering how long I could keep up the charade and what would happen when I finally decided to break free. The morning after the dinner party, I woke to an empty bed and the faint aroma of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Calvin's side was cold, untouched. I sighed, steeling myself for another day of walking on eggshells. As I descended the stairs, I heard Calvin's voice, low and intense. "I don't care what it takes. Make it happen." He ended the call abruptly as I entered the kitchen. "Good morning, darling," he said, his tone shifting seamlessly to warmth. "Sleep well?" I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Is everything okay?" That sounded like a tense call. Calvin waved dismissively. "Just business. Nothing for you to worry about." The dismissal stung, but I swallowed my retort. "I was thinking of visiting my mother today. She hasn't been feeling well." His eyes narrowed. "Again? You were just there last week. Don't you think you're neglecting your responsibilities here?" "My responsibilities?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "Calvin, she's my mother." "And I'm your husband," he countered, his voice hardening. "This house doesn't run itself, Michelle." Before I could respond, Jasper slouched into the kitchen, his eyes glued to his phone. "Dad, can I borrow the car tonight?" Calvin's demeanor softened instantly. "Of course, son. Just be careful." I couldn't help but notice the stark difference in how he addressed us both. "Jasper, would you like some breakfast?" I offered, trying to bridge the gap. He barely glanced up. "No thanks. I don't eat your food." Calvin chuckled, as if his son's rudeness was endearing. "He's at that age, Michelle. Don't take it personally." But I did take it personally. Every slight, every dismissal, chipped away at my resolve to make this family work. The day dragged on, a series of small indignities. Calvin suggested I reorganize his office, a task that took hours. Jasper left dirty dishes strewn throughout the house, ignoring my requests to clean up. By evening, I was exhausted and on edge. As I prepared dinner, Samantha arrived unannounced. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said, breezing past me into the kitchen. "Calvin mentioned you were making your famous pot roast." I bit back a sigh. "Of course not. There's plenty to go around." Samantha perched on a bar stool, watching me work. "So, how are things really going, Michelle? You seemed a bit off at the party last night." "Everything's fine," I lied, focusing on chopping vegetables. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, if there are any issues, you can talk to me. I've known Calvin for years. I understand how he can be sometimes." I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. Was this a genuine offer of support or another of Samantha's mind games? Before I could decide, Calvin entered, clapping his hands together. "Something smells delicious." Samantha, glad you could join us." Dinner was a minefield of thinly veiled criticisms and backhanded compliments. Calvin picked at his food, commenting on the lack of seasoning. Jasper texted throughout the meal, barely acknowledging anyone's presence. "Michelle," Calvin said suddenly, "I forgot to mention. We're hosting a charity gala next month. I'll need you to handle all the arrangements." I nearly choked on my wine. "A gala? Calvin, that's a massive undertaking. I don't know if I—" "Nonsense," he interrupted. "You're more than capable. Besides, it's important for my business. You wouldn't want to let me down, would you?" Samantha chimed in. "Oh, how exciting. I'd be happy to help, of course. After all, these things require a certain touch." The implication was clear. I wasn't up to the task alone. As the evening wore on, tension simmered just below the surface. Every comment felt loaded, every glance heavy with unspoken judgment. When Jasper knocked over his water glass, soaking the tablecloth, it was the final straw. "For God's sake, Jasper," I snapped, jumping up to mop at the spreading stain. "Can't you pay attention for 5 minutes?" The table fell silent. Jasper glared at me, his face flushing with anger. "Don't talk to me like that. You're not my mother." "No," I shot back, years of frustration bubbling over. But I am the one who cleans up after you, cooks your meals, and tries to make this house a home. A little respect wouldn't kill you. Michelle, Calvin's voice was dangerously quiet. That's enough. I turned to him, ready to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me cold. It wasn't just anger I saw there, it was a promise of consequences. Samantha cleared her throat. Well, this has been illuminating. Perhaps I should go. As she gathered her things, I retreated to the kitchen, hands shaking as I loaded the dishwasher. The weight of my outburst settled over me like a shroud. I'd crossed a line, and I knew there would be a price to pay. Later that night, as Calvin berated me for my inexcusable behavior, I found myself wondering how much longer I could endure this life. The facade of happiness was crumbling, revealing the rot beneath. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. Thinking of you, sweetheart. Remember, you're stronger than you know. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't change Calvin or Jasper, but I could change my response to them. It was time to start fighting back in my own quiet way. Little did they know, the woman they thought they had under control was about to show her true strength. The morning after the disastrous dinner, Calvin called me into his study. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes held a cold fury that made my stomach clench. Michelle, he began, his voice deceptively soft, we need to discuss our financial situation. I braced myself, knowing this conversation was punishment for my outburst. What about it? Calvin leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. I've been reviewing our expenses. Frankly, I'm concerned about your spending habits. I blinked in disbelief. My spending habits? Calvin, I barely buy anything for myself. He waved a dismissive hand. That's not the point. The point is, we need to tighten our belts. From now on, I'll be giving you a monthly allowance for household expenses. An allowance? I echoed, feeling like I'd been slapped. I'm not a child, Calvin. I'm your wife. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course you are, darling. But let's face it, I'm the one who handles the big financial decisions. This is for your own good. As he outlined the paltry sum he deemed sufficient, I felt a familiar mix of anger and helplessness rise within me. But beneath it, a new emotion was taking root: determination. That afternoon, as I grudgingly sorted through bills, I noticed something odd. Despite Calvin's claims of financial strain, there were charges for expensive restaurants, high-end clothing stores, and a membership to an exclusive golf club, all in his name. My hands shook as I dug deeper, uncovering a pattern of lavish spending that contradicted everything he'd told me. The hypocrisy was staggering. Just then, Jasper burst into the room. Where's Dad? He promised to take me car shopping today. I looked up, still reeling from my discovery. Car shopping? Jasper, you just got your license. He rolled his eyes. So? Dad said I could have any car I want for my birthday. It's not like we can't afford it. As Jasper stomped off, muttering about my interference, a plan began to form in my mind. If Calvin was going to treat me like a child, I'd have to start acting like an adult, without his knowledge. The next day, I visited my local bank under the guise of running errands. The teller's eyebrows rose as I requested to open a separate, secret account. Are you sure, Mrs. Reeves? She asked, glancing at my wedding ring. Your husband's name isn't on any of these forms. I met her gaze steadily. I'm sure. This account is for me and me alone. As I left the bank, a small envelope clutched in my hand, I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. It wasn't much, just a few $100s I'd managed to squirrel away, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I became an expert in creative accounting. Every time Calvin handed me my allowance, I found ways to stretch it further than he could have imagined. Generic brands replaced name brands. I started clipping coupons religiously. And with every penny saved, my secret account grew. One evening, as I prepared dinner, Calvin sauntered into the kitchen, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. You've really taken our budget talk to heart, haven't you? He remarked, eyeing the modest meal I was cooking. I forced a smile. Just trying to be responsible. He patted my cheek condescendingly. That's my girl. Oh, by the way, I'll be out late tonight. Business dinner. As he left, I caught a whiff of expensive cologne. Definitely not the brand I'd bought him for Christmas. Another lie to add to the growing pile. Later that night, unable to sleep, I crept down to Calvin's study. The room was dark, save for the glow of his computer screen. He'd forgotten to log out. My heart raced as I sat at his desk. This was wrong, a violation of privacy. But hadn't he violated my trust countless times? With trembling fingers, I began to explore his financial records. What I found made my blood run cold. Hidden accounts, massive debts, and worst of all, a series of transfers to an unknown recipient, large sums of money, sent regularly over the past year. I sat back, my mind reeling. The lavish lifestyle, the constant business trips, the late nights at the office. It was all a facade. Calvin wasn't just controlling. He was desperate. As I shut down the computer and crept back to bed, I realized the ground beneath my feet had shifted. The man I'd married, the life I thought I had, it was all built on lies. In that moment, staring at the ceiling as Calvin's soft snores filled the room, I made a decision. The secret account wasn't just about saving money anymore. It was about saving myself. I reached for my phone, opening a note-taking app. Slowly, methodically, I began to list everything I'd need to start a new life. Clothes, important documents, a place to stay. It wouldn't be easy. Calvin had woven his control into every aspect of my life. But as I added items to my escape plan, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't experienced in years. Calvin's financial chains might have been meant to bind me, but they had become the very thing that would set me free. And when the time came to break those chains, I would be ready. Little did I know, the catalyst for my escape was just around the corner, in the form of a phone call that would change everything. The shrill ring of my phone pierced the early morning silence. Groggily, I fumbled for it, my heart racing as I recognized the number of my mother's nursing home. Mrs. Reeves? It's about your mother, Evelyn. She's had a fall. We've taken her to the hospital. I was out of bed and throwing on clothes before the call even ended. As I scribbled a hasty note for Calvin, my hand trembled. This was the moment I'd been dreading and secretly, shamefully, waiting for. The drive to the hospital was a blur of worry and guilt. I'd been so wrapped up in my own problems, I'd neglected the one person who'd always been there for me. Hours later, I sat by Evelyn's bedside, holding her frail hand. The doctors assured me she'd recover, but the fall had weakened her significantly. As her eyes fluttered open, a weak smile crossed her face. "Michelle," she whispered, "you're here." I squeezed her hand gently. "Of course I'm here, Mom. I'm so sorry I haven't visited more often." Evelyn's gaze sharpened, seeing right through me as she always had. "What's wrong, sweetheart? And don't tell me it's nothing. I know that look. The dam broke." Words poured out of me. Calvin's controlling behavior, Jasper's disrespect, the financial deceptions, my secret savings. Evelyn listened silently, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. When I finally fell quiet, she spoke. "Michelle, do you remember what I told you when you were little and the neighborhood kids were bullying you?" I nodded, tears welling up. "You said I was stronger than I knew, and that I should never let anyone make me feel small." "Exactly," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. "You've always had that strength inside you. It's time to use it." As we talked, a plan began to form. Evelyn insisted I stay with her during her recovery, giving me a legitimate reason to be away from Calvin. It was the perfect opportunity to start reclaiming my independence. When I returned home to pack a bag, Calvin was waiting, his face a mask of concern. "Where have you been?" "I've been worried sick." I explained about Evelyn's fall, watching his expression shift from worry to annoyance. "How long will you be gone?" he demanded. "As long as it takes," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "My mother needs me." Calvin's eyes narrowed. "And what about your responsibilities here? The charity gala is in a few weeks. You can't just abandon everything." I met his gaze, feeling a surge of newfound strength. "I'm not abandoning anything, Calvin. I'm prioritizing. My mother comes first. As I packed, I could feel Calvin's eyes boring into my back. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch under his scrutiny. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of hospital visits, physical therapy appointments, and quiet conversations with Evelyn. Away from Calvin's suffocating presence, I felt like I could breathe again. One afternoon, as Evelyn napped, I found myself browsing cooking websites on my laptop. A recipe for her favorite lemon tart caught my eye, and before I knew it, I was typing out my own version, complete with tips and personal anecdotes. "What are you working on?" Evelyn's voice startled me. I turned the screen towards her, suddenly shy. "Just writing down some recipes." "It's silly, really." Evelyn's eyes lit up as she read. "Silly? Michelle, this is wonderful. You've always had a gift with food. Why haven't you done anything with it?" I shrugged, thinking of all the times Calvin had dismissed my cooking as just a hobby. But here, in this quiet hospital room, his voice seemed far away. "You know," Evelyn said thoughtfully, "there are websites where people share recipes and stories. Blogs, I think they're called. Have you ever thought about starting one?" The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. In stolen moments between caring for Evelyn and fielding increasingly demanding calls from Calvin, I researched food blogs, learning about web design and social media strategies. As Evelyn grew stronger, so did my resolve. The day before I was due to return home, I sat at my laptop, finger hovering over the publish button of my newly created blog. "What are you waiting for?" Evelyn asked, a knowing smile on her face. Taking a deep breath, I clicked. Michelle's Kitchen was live. That night, as I packed my bags, my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had left a comment on my blog. Then another. And another. With each positive response, I felt a piece of myself, the real Michelle, not Calvin's carefully controlled wife, coming back to life. As I drove home the next day, my mind raced with possibilities. The blog was just the beginning. For the first time in years, I had something that was truly mine, a secret that gave me strength instead of shame. Calvin was waiting when I arrived, his arms crossed. "Welcome back," he said, his tone clipped. "I hope you're ready to get back to work. We have a lot to catch up on." I nodded, outwardly compliant, but inwardly resolute. Little did Calvin know, but his perfectly controlled world was about to change. And this time, I would be the one calling the shots. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the kitchen as I feverishly typed out my latest blog post. It was well past midnight, but the words flowed effortlessly, fueled by a passion I'd long forgotten I possessed. Michelle's Kitchen had become my secret refuge over the past few months. What started as a simple outlet had blossomed into a vibrant community of food lovers, each post garnering more comments and shares than the last. A notification pinged. Another follower milestone reached. I allowed myself a small smile before glancing nervously at the kitchen door. Calvin's snores drifted from upstairs, a reminder of the precarious balance I was maintaining. As I hit publish on my latest recipe, a decadent chocolate torte that had been my grandmother's specialty, I felt a familiar mix of exhilaration and fear. Each post was a tiny act of rebellion, a piece of myself reclaimed from Calvin's suffocating control. The next morning, as I prepared Calvin's breakfast, my mind was already racing with ideas for my next blog entry. I was so lost in thought that I barely registered Calvin's presence until he cleared his throat loudly. "You seem distracted lately," he remarked, his tone deceptively casual. "Is everything all right?" I plastered on a smile. "Of course. Just thinking about the charity gala preparations." Calvin nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. I need you focused on that. It's crucial for my business connections." As he left for work, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The lie tasted bitter, but the alternative, Calvin discovering my growing independence, was unthinkable. Later that afternoon, as I was editing photos for my next post, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Is this Michelle Reeves?" The voice on the other end was warm and professional. "I'm Sarah Thompson from Culinary Creations Publishing. We've been following your blog and we're very impressed." My heart raced as Sarah explained their interest in turning my blog into a cookbook. It was everything I dreamed of, yet never dared to hope for. We'd love to set up a meeting to discuss the details, Sarah continued. Are you available next week? I agreed, my mind spinning with possibilities and complications. As I hung up, I caught sight of my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back at me looked alive, vibrant, nothing like the subdued housewife Calvin expected me to be. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I wrestled with whether to tell Calvin about the publishing offer. Part of me longed to share my excitement, to prove that I was more than just his wife. But the larger part, the part that had learned to survive in this gilded cage, knew better. Jasper's voice cut through my thoughts as he entered the kitchen. What's for dinner? It better not be that weird healthy stuff again. I bit back a retort, focusing on chopping vegetables. It's chicken parmesan, your favorite. Jasper grunted noncommittally, then paused, eyeing me suspiciously. You look different. What's going on? For a moment, I considered confiding in him. But the memory of his constant dismissals and Calvin-like criticisms stopped me. Nothing's going on, Jasper. Just a good day, that's all. As we sat down to dinner, Calvin dominated the conversation with talk of business deals and social engagements. I nodded at appropriate intervals, my mind elsewhere. Oh, by the way, Calvin said casually, Samantha will be staying with us next week. She's having some work done on her house. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Samantha's presence would make it nearly impossible to maintain my secret life. Next week? But the charity gala preparations. We'll be fine, Calvin interrupted. Samantha's offered to help. Isn't that generous of her? The look in his eyes brooked no argument. I nodded, forcing a smile. Of course. How thoughtful. That night, as Calvin slept, I slipped out of bed and down to the kitchen. The house was silent as I opened my laptop, the screen's glow a beacon of hope in the darkness. I had a decision to make. The publishing offer was a chance at real independence, a way out of the suffocating life Calvin had crafted for me. But pursuing it meant taking an enormous risk. As I scrolled through my blog, reading comments from followers who found joy and inspiration in my recipes, I felt a surge of determination. I'd spent years dimming my light to fit into Calvin's world. It was time to shine. With trembling fingers, I composed an email to Sarah, confirming our meeting. As I hit send, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was choosing my own path. The road ahead would be challenging. Samantha's impending visit, Calvin's constant surveillance, the secrecy required to pursue my dreams. It was a precarious balancing act. But as I closed my laptop and crept back to bed, I felt a flicker of hope ignite in my chest. Calvin stirred as I slipped under the covers. Everything okay? He mumbled sleepily. Everything's fine, I whispered, the lie coming easily. Go back to sleep. As Calvin's breathing evened out, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. The seeds of change had been planted. Now it was time to watch them grow and to prepare for the storm that would inevitably follow. The day of reckoning arrived with the subtlety of a thunderclap. I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I clutched the advance check from Culinary Creations Publishing. The paper felt impossibly heavy, weighted with both promise and peril. Calvin's voice boomed from the study, punctuated by Samantha's sycophantic laughter. They were discussing the upcoming charity gala, an event that had consumed our household for weeks. Little did they know it would pale in comparison to the storm I was about to unleash. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and marched towards the study. Each step felt like a small rebellion, years of suppressed anger and resentment fueling my resolve. Calvin, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. He looked up, annoyance flashing across his face. Can it wait? Samantha and I are finalizing the gala details. No, I replied firmly. It can't. Samantha raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Oh my, this sounds serious. Should I leave you two alone? Stay, I said, meeting her gaze. You should hear this too. Calvin's expression darkened. Michelle, what's going on? I took a deep breath, then placed the check on his desk. I've been offered a book deal. For my cooking blog. The silence that followed was deafening. Calvin stared at the check, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. Samantha's smirk had frozen, her eyes darting between Calvin and me. Your cooking blog. Calvin's voice was dangerously low. What cooking blog? The one I've been running for months, I replied, a hint of defiance creeping into my tone. The one that's gained thousands of followers. The one that's going to be my ticket to independence. Calvin stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Independence? What the hell are you talking about, Michelle? I stood my ground as he loomed over me. I'm talking about leaving, Calvin. This marriage, this life you've trapped me in, I'm done. Samantha gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her mouth in mock shock. Michelle, how could you? After everything Calvin's done for you? I turned to her, years of pent-up frustration boiling over. Done for me? You mean controlled me, belittled me, made me feel worthless. Calvin's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You ungrateful, he sputtered, reaching for the check. I snatched it away before he could grab it. No, I said firmly. This is mine. I earned it, just like I've earned the right to live my own life. Just then, Jasper burst into the room, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. What's going on? I heard shouting. Calvin turned to his son, a cruel smile twisting his features. Your stepmother here thinks she's some kind of celebrity chef. She's abandoning her family for a ridiculous pipe dream. Jasper's eyes widened, then narrowed as he turned to me. Is that true? You're leaving? I met his gaze, seeing not just anger there, but a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps? I'm not abandoning anyone, Jasper. I'm choosing myself for once. Calvin laughed bitterly. Choosing yourself? And what about your responsibilities? The gala, this family, everything we've built. Everything you've built, you mean? I shot back. On lies and manipulation. Did you think I wouldn't find out about the debts, Calvin? The money you've been funneling to God knows where? The color drained from Calvin's face. Samantha's gasp this time was genuine. Jasper looked between us, confusion etched on his features. You don't know what you're talking about, Calvin hissed, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I stood taller, feeling a surge of power I'd never experienced before. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm done being your puppet, Calvin. I'm done pretending everything's perfect when it's all falling apart. Jasper stepped forward, his voice uncharacteristically small. Dad, what's she talking about? What debts? Calvin whirled on his son. Stay out of this, Jasper. This doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't, I interjected. He deserves to know the truth. About the money, about how you've treated me, about all of it. Samantha, sensing the shift in power, began inching towards the door. Perhaps I should go. Oh no. Lunged for me then, his face contorted with rage. But years of pent-up anger had made me quicker, stronger. I dodged his grasp, watching as he stumbled, his carefully constructed image of control crumbling before our eyes. Don't you dare touch her, Jasper shouted, surprising us all as he stepped between Calvin and me. In that moment, looking at Jasper's conflicted face, I saw a glimmer of the boy he could have been without Calvin's toxic influence. It almost made me waver. Almost. I'm leaving, I announced, my voice ringing with finality. I've already packed my bags. I have a place to stay and a future to build. One that doesn't include any of this. As I turned to walk out, Calvin's voice, now tinged with desperation, called out. You'll never make it on your own, Michelle. You need me. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the man I'd once thought I loved. No, Calvin. I don't need you. I never did. And that's what scares you the most. With those words, I walked out of the study, out of the house that had been my prison for so long. The warm summer air hit my face, carrying with it the promise of freedom and a life reclaimed. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting, Calvin's shouts, Samantha's shrill voice, Jasper's confused questions. But for the first time in years, none of it was my problem. As I climbed into my packed car, I allowed myself a small smile. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel. And that made all the difference. The aftermath of my confrontation with Calvin unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. I had taken refuge at Evelyn's house, my phone buzzing incessantly with messages from Calvin, Jasper, and even Samantha. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the next steps of my newfound freedom. 3 days after I left, a loud knock at Evelyn's door shattered the peaceful morning. I opened it to find Jasper, his face a mix of anger and confusion. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the house. I sighed, closing the door. "Jasper, I know you're upset, but—" "Upset," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "Dad's falling apart. The charity gala's been canceled. There are rumors all over town about financial problems. What the hell is going on?" I gestured for him to sit, my heart heavy. "Jasper, there's a lot you don't know about your father. About our marriage." Over the next hour, I laid out the truth: Calvin's controlling behavior, the financial deceptions, the emotional manipulation. Jasper listened, his face growing paler with each revelation. "But he always said you were the one who was bad with money," Jasper mumbled, his world visibly crumbling around him. I reached out, touching his arm gently. "Your father is very good at twisting the truth, Jasper. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this." Jasper stood abruptly, pacing the room. "I don't understand. If things were so bad, why didn't you leave sooner?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "It's not that simple, Jasper. Your father, he has a way of making you doubt yourself, of making you believe you need him." Jasper's phone buzzed, Calvin's name flashing on the screen. He ignored it, looking at me with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. "I have to go," he said finally. I need time to process all this." As Jasper left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was out, for better or worse. The next day, as I was working on a new blog post, my phone rang. It was Sarah from the publishing company. "Michelle, have you seen the news?" she asked, her voice tense. I frowned, opening my laptop to check the local news site. My heart stopped as I read the headline: "Prominent businessman Calvin Reeves under investigation for financial fraud." The article detailed allegations of embezzlement, tax evasion, and misuse of charity funds. Calvin's carefully constructed empire was crumbling before my eyes. As I hung up with Sarah, assuring her that the scandal wouldn't affect our book deal, another call came through. It was Samantha. "You need to come back," she said without preamble, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "He's not handling this well." I laughed bitterly. "And why should I care, Samantha? After everything he's done?" There was a pause, then Samantha's voice came back, quieter this time. "Because there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago." Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet Samantha at a cafe in town. When I arrived, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished, smirking woman I'd known. In her place sat someone who looked haunted, defeated. "Calvin's not who you think he is," Samantha began, her hands shaking as she clutched her coffee cup. "He's not who any of us thought he was." Over the next hour, Samantha unraveled a tale that left me reeling. Calvin's first wife hadn't left him, as he'd always claimed. She died under suspicious circumstances that Calvin had gone to great lengths to cover up. "I helped him," Samantha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I helped him hide the truth. And then I watched him do the same thing to you, Michelle. I'm so sorry." As Samantha's confession poured out, I felt a strange mix of vindication and horror. The man I'd married, the man I'd feared and finally stood up to, was capable of far worse than I'd ever imagined. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Samantha met my gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and determination. "Because it's time for the truth to come out. All of it. And because I think Jasper might be in danger." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Calvin's losing everything," Samantha explained. "His money, his reputation, his control. Jasper's all he is left. And Calvin? He doesn't handle loss well. I stood up, my mind racing. We need to go. Now. As we raced towards Calvin's house, my phone buzzed with a text from Jasper. Dad's acting weird. Can you come over? My heart pounded as we pulled up to the house I'd fled just days ago. Police cars were already there, lights flashing. I spotted Jasper sitting on the front steps, looking shell-shocked. I rushed to him. Pulling him into a hug, he didn't resist. Are you okay? What happened? Jasper looked up at me, his eyes haunted. Dad. He tried to. I don't even know. The police are with him now. As if on cue, the front door opened. 2 officers emerged, leading a handcuffed Calvin between them. Our eyes met as they passed, and I saw something I'd never seen in Calvin's gaze before: defeat. Standing there, with Jasper leaning against me and Samantha hovering nearby, I realized that this was far from over. Calvin's reckoning had come, but the aftershocks would be felt for a long time to come. As the police car drove away, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The truth was finally out, and with it came a new set of challenges. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to face them head-on. The key clicked in the lock of my new apartment, and I stepped inside, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and possibility. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the small but cozy space that was now mine and mine alone. As I set down the last of my boxes, my phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. All settled in, sweetheart? Remember, I'm just a call away if you need anything. I smiled, typing back a quick thank you. My mother's unwavering support had been my lifeline through the tumultuous past few months. Unpacking could wait. I settled at my new writing desk, opening my laptop to find a flood of notifications from my blog. The outpouring of support from my followers had been overwhelming since the news of Calvin's arrest broke. Many shared their own stories of survival and escape from toxic relationships, forming a community of strength and resilience. As I scrolled through the comments, an email notification popped up. It was from Sarah at the publishing house. Michelle, great news! Your cookbook proposal has been approved. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the contract and timeline. Your story has resonated with so many people, and we believe this book will be a powerful testament to your journey. Looking forward to working with you. Sarah. Tears of joy welled up in my eyes. This was it, the culmination of all my hard work, my secret dreams, my quiet rebellion against Calvin's oppression. I was no longer just his wife, no longer defined by his control. I was an author, a creator, a survivor. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. I opened it to find Jasper standing there, looking uncertain and a bit sheepish. Hey, he said softly. I hope it's okay that I'm here. Grandma Evelyn gave me your address. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Of course, Jasper. You're always welcome. He looked around the apartment, his eyes lingering on the boxes and the half-set-up kitchen. It's nice, he said finally. Cozy. We sat on the small couch, an awkward silence stretching between us. Finally, Jasper spoke. I'm sorry, he blurted out. For everything. The way I treated you, the things I said. I was just trying to be like Dad. I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I reached out, squeezing his hand. Oh, Jasper. You have nothing to apologize for. Your father. He manipulated both of us. But we're free now. We can start over. Jasper nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about following your passion. I think I want to go to culinary school. If that's okay. I laughed, pulling him into a hug. Of course it's okay. It's more than okay. It's wonderful. As Jasper left, promising to come by for cooking lessons soon, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The last piece of the puzzle was falling into place. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Meetings with my publisher, planning sessions for my cookbook, and a steady stream of blog posts kept me busy. But it was a different kind of busy than I'd known with Calvin. This was fulfilling, energizing, purposeful. One sunny afternoon, as I was testing recipes in my tiny kitchen, my phone rang. It was Samantha. Michelle, she said, her voice subdued. I thought you should know. Calvin's trial date has been set. I took a deep breath, surprised by the lack of anxiety I felt the news. Thank you for letting me know, Samantha. How are you holding up? There was a pause. I'm managing. I've started therapy, trying to understand why I enabled his behavior for so long. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but I hope someday you can forgive me. Samantha, I said gently, the fact that you're trying to change, that you're facing the truth, that's what matters. We've all got healing to do. As I hung up, I realized how far I'd come. The woman who had trembled at Calvin's every word, who had doubted her own worth and abilities, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally, truly free. That evening, I sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. My laptop was open, the first chapter of my cookbook glowing on the screen. To all the women who have ever felt trapped, powerless, or alone, this book is for you. It's a reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to follow your passions, to become the person you were always meant to be. Every recipe in these pages is a step towards freedom, towards self-love, towards a future bright with possibility. My journey from a controlled wife to an independent woman wasn't easy, but it was worth every struggle. And if I can do it, so can you. So tie on your apron, preheat that oven, and let's cook up a new life together, one delicious, empowering recipe at a time. As I typed the last words, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead might not always be smooth, but it was mine to travel. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. I raised my glass to the setting sun, toasting to new beginnings, hard-won freedom, and the sweet taste of a life reclaimed. The best was yet to come, and I was ready for every moment of it.